Okay, and so with that, let me introduce myself. So my name is Brian Laird, and I'm an associate professor in the School of Public Health and Health Systems, and I'm also the Associate Dean Graduate Studies for our Faculty of Applied Health Sciences. And as I'm sure all of you are aware, we're here for our Academic Integrity Workshop for our faculty. Now, our Faculty of Applied Health Sciences has 3 academic units, and I imagine that you've been learning about a lot of this information from your other orientation sessions, so I won't belabor this too much. But if you're here, then we can be pretty confident that you're a member of one of these 3 units, either from the Department of Kinesiology, the Department of Rec and Leisure Studies, or the School of Public Health and Health Systems. We also have students that are in Masters of Social Work that's offered at the Renison University College, but I think that most of these students took part in an earlier session. But regardless of which unit you're coming from, welcome today. So the plan for this workshop today is we're going to be covering what is academic integrity. We're going to talk about academic integrity training here at University of Waterloo. We're going to cover the policies that are relevant to academic integrity and dive a bit into academic misconduct, how to avoid things like plagiarism, and we're also going to workshop through a few questions, take a look at what's acceptable paraphrasing and what is not acceptable. At the end of the presentation, we also have some additional slides and resources that will be distributed to you afterwards, and there's an optional quiz that you can take part in as well to further test what you've learned here today. Okay, so what is academic integrity? Now, we often think of academic integrity in terms of the absence of academic integrity. That is the presence of academic misconduct, because there'll be certainly lots of cases that make it into the news, some locally here in Waterloo, and then across nationally and internationally as well. But if we circle back to what academic integrity is, what a definition that we have at our fingertips is that it is a commitment, even in the face of adversity, to give fundamental values, including honesty, trust, fairness, respect, and responsibility. As a graduate student here at the University of Waterloo, you have many resources available to you to help better understand what is academic integrity and how to avoid things like plagiarism. So I definitely encourage you to look at resources like the Academic Integrity website, and we've provided the link on this slide here. Now, for the academic integrity training for our graduate students, we have what's referred to as the academic integrity milestone. Now, to complete this milestone, which is going to be recorded on your transcript and required to be able to graduate, you need to attend this workshop. So check for all of you here today. And you also need to be familiar with Policy 71, including those related to academic offenses and penalties, a range of other University of Waterloo policies, as well as the Academic Integrity website. Once after you're done with this workshop today, we'll ask that you submit your Academic Integrity Milestone Pledge form to the Dropbox, which you'll be able to access from GradReady, which is available through Learn. For those of you that don't have access to GradReady, for example, if you are not in your first term this September, then you'll be able to access this pledge form from your academic coordinator in your unit, and you can provide it to them to get submitted, so you can complete this this milestone. In addition to the workshop and this milestone pledge form, you need to complete the graduate academic integrity module, or grad aim, that's going to be available through Learn. And what I want to point out here is that you have to complete it within the first 8 weeks of your program, and it also includes a required quiz at the end of this module, and you'll need to receive at least 75% to pass this module. Now, this pledge form, it's going to look a lot like this content here on this slide, where you're going to be attesting the fact that you have completed this workshop, and that you're aware that you're also going to have to complete the graduate academic integrity module. The last point on this milestone pledge form says that if I'm in any doubt of the meaning or interpretation of any of the above policies, I'll seek clarification from an appropriate university authority, such as the Associate Dean for Graduate Studies, and that's me. Now, it could be some time, unfortunately, until you're able to meet and speak with me in my office in Burt Matthews Hall, but you can get in touch with me at this university extension here, as well as this email address. Now, just to give you a bit of a primer to what this graduate academic integrity module is going to look like, it's a separate course that's going to be offered through Learn. So it's going to look a fair bit like what you see here. You'll be able to access the course materials, and those course materials will include additional content related to plagiarism and Policy 71 related to student discipline. Once you've completed all of the content and the course materials in this grad aim, you'll see all these green check marks here in the course. Then you can complete the quiz under the assessment and get that taken care of. Now, in terms of the policies that are relevant to academic integrity, there are a number of them that you have to be familiar with, and we'll go through some of the high-level points on each of them today. For Policy 33, which relates to ethical behavior, what we need to remember is that the university aims to ensure an environment of tolerance and respect, and believes that the right of individuals to advance their views openly must be upheld through the university. So basically, this is a University of Waterloo policy that's reinforcing the Ontario Human Rights Code. Now, violations of this of this policy can include things like discrimination and harassment and poisoned work environments. Now, there's within the policy a lot of details related to the actions, advice, and supports that are going to be offered to those that experience these type of violations, and those supports are to a large extent offered through the Human Rights, Equity, and Inclusion Office, as well as the Conflict Management and Human Rights Office. But of course, the thing that we also need to remember is that things like harassment and sexual harassment are not only violations of University of Waterloo policy, but can also have legal implications as well. So there are also supports that can be available to you through the University of Waterloo Police, as well as additional resources from the Federation of Students. What I do want to point out is that you can find all the text with the additional details of these policies at the links at the bottom of these slides. For Policy 69, which relates to conflicts of interest, in this policy, it states that a conflict of interest or a potential conflict of interest exists when a member of the university is or may be in a position to use research, knowledge, authority, or influence for personal or family gain, or to benefit others to the detriment of the institution. And And what's critically important here is that that members of the university community, including students, should of their own volition take the initiative to disclose conflicts or potential conflict of interest situations. These types of situations that could lead to conflicts or perceived conflicts of interest could include things like favoring outside interests for personal gain, the inappropriate use of university personnel for financial gain, the inappropriate use of information, or conflicts of commitment. Now, Policy 70 relates to two separate but related topics, and are the topics of petitions and grievances. Now, what you really should understand about petitions is that when a student submits a petition, they're asking for an exception or relief from normal faculty or university rules or regulations. And these examples can include adding and dropping courses after deadlines, which of course can have implications on tuition payments, or removing WDs for late drops from transcripts and those kinds of things. Grievances, on the other hand, are submitted when a student believes that a decision made by an authority at the university, and including faculty members, has been unfair or unreasonable. Grievances could include, for example, if you think that an instructor has made an error in their academic judgment when marking, if you believe that a method of evaluation was not fair or reasonable, or if an instructor deviates substantially from a course outline without reasonable notice. Now, for the details on how to submit petitions and grievances, I'd suggest that you take a look at the details contained within Policy 70 at this link here. Now, the most important one of these policies that relates to academic integrity is that of Policy 71, which is related to student discipline. So student discipline offenses at the university are generally divided into these two broad categories. That is, say, academic offenses or non-academic offenses. The academic offenses will include things like plagiarism, cheating, unauthorized collaboration. For example, if you're working on an assignment in a group when you're supposed to be working on it by yourself. It can also include violations of research ethics. Now, I do want to point out is that that within all of the policies and procedures for handling suspected cases or alleged cases of student misconduct, that there's procedural fairness that's built into these policies, such as you have the right to know what the claims are against you, to be able to see what the evidence is against you, and to be able to provide evidence related to the claim to your instructor and to your associate dean. Now, largely the authority to deal with these matters under this policy rests with the associate deans within your faculty, namely me. Now, part of the procedural fairness within student discipline proceedings, as well as within grievances, is that if a decision has been rendered against you that you disagree with, you can appeal that decision within 10 working days. And in that case, then the tribunal, so a fresh set of eyes, will review the case, and they can either confirm or reverse the decision, they could confirm or change the penalty, or they could refer the case back to a previous level. One of the next policies that's relevant here today is that in Policy 73, which is covering intellectual property rights. Within this policy, it specifies that at the University of Waterloo, this is actually a feature that's very unique at Waterloo relative to other universities in Canada, is that the intellectual property belongs to its creators, not the university. What this means is it's especially important for the members of the University of Waterloo community to acknowledge all the contributors properly, and to share the proceeds, such as that result from commercialization, appropriately among these contributors. It's also important that we're respecting the intellectual property rights of others, and so the expectation for grad students is not to use pirated software or copying textbooks and so on. And then in addition, it's critical to follow rules of authorship, and this policy also provides details related to data management and storage. Another issue that can relate to data management and storage will include those related to research ethics. And what I want to emphasize here is that all research that's associated with your studies here at the University of Waterloo that's either collecting or analyzing data from human participants is going to require ethics clearance. And so for definition of what is or is not research, you can refer to this FAQ page from the Office of Research. But what I really want to point out is that to get this ethics clearance, it takes time. And one of the first steps would be to complete a Office of Research Ethics online tutorial and submit online forms with all your materials. And since these processes take time for review, make sure that that you're submitting these forms in a timely manner so that you can get the approvals you need to be able to proceed with your studies. And I guess the other thing that I should point out is, although this slide refers to data from human participants, there's also similar ethics processes that are built in for those of you that are working with animal models as well. Now, in terms of the topic of academic misconduct, one of the most common examples that comes upon my desk of academic misconduct at the university is that of plagiarism. To understand the idea of plagiarism, we need to respect that words and ideas are the property of their authors, and hence plagiarism is the theft of those authors' property. And so when you're submitting your work for your graduate studies, you are saying that this work is my own, except where I've given full and explicit acknowledgement of other people's work. And plagiarism happens when you don't make those explicit acknowledgements. Okay, so I've been talking for 20 minutes now, so let's give it a chance to actually make this a workshop. So in the chat box, you'll find a link to a form that'll have a few questions. Questions like the ones we're seeing here, such as, is plagiarism only possible for written work? Can one plagiarize themselves? And is it okay to give a student a copy of your assignment? So what I'd like you to do is to access these questions from that form, put in your answers, and we'll take a look at what you think about plagiarism. Okay, so for this first question about is plagiarism only possible for written work, the majority is correct here. I'm trust you're seeing from this shared screen here, we have over 95% of you that recognize that plagiarism is also possible for oral presentations as well, and it's also possible for graphical representations. Okay, and the for this question of whether or not you can plagiarize yourself, uh, again, the majority here is correct that one can plagiarize themselves, but I think probably where there's the disagreement here among the 23 students that have said no is that the point being that one shouldn't plagiarize themselves. Okay, and so for this last question, is it okay to give another student a copy of your assignment? The the only time when it's really okay to give another student a copy of your assignment is when it's an explicit case where an assignment is group work. In all of their cases, uh, it's really playing with fire, because if that other student copies any of the material that is within your assignment, that not only can that student that has copied your work face academic penalties, but as the student that's provided the other student their assignment, you can also face academic misconduct charges. And this is equally true once you've completed the course. So just because you've finished a course doesn't mean that that it's okay to pass off copies of your assignments uh, to other students. Okay, we'll swing back to my PowerPoint slides over here. Now, of course, every student here, just like all of your faculty supervisors and the academic support staffs, they want you to be able to avoid plagiarism. Nobody wants to see academic misconduct charges. One of the best ways to avoid plagiarism is through the proper use of paraphrasing. Now, what I mean by paraphrasing is when you're trying to put someone else's ideas into your own words. Now, when you're doing so, the text that you are writing through paraphrase, and it could either be longer, shorter, or the same length as the original text. It's critical, though, that it cannot use the same sentence structure uh, or unique words. Uh, the key point when you're paraphrasing is that you have to both use in-text references or in-text citations, for example, using an author year format to credit the ideas from others within that sentence. In addition to the in-text reference, you also need to include a reference list at the end of the thesis, paper, report, etc., that is going to point your instructor or TAs or others to the materials that you use to gather the information that went into those in-text references. One of the other strategies for avoiding plagiarism is through summarizing. Now, summarizing is similar to that of paraphrasing in that we're restating the main ideas of others in your own words. Uh, where where it is distinct from paraphrasing uh, is that it's going to be much shorter than the original text. So we're talking a paragraph instead of a page, a sentence instead of a paragraph, and so on. So it's still critical here to use your own words and to use the in-text citations and the reference list so that you're acknowledging the ideas of others. Now, the last tool in the toolbox for avoiding plagiarism is using quotations. And now, when we're using quotations, we are, in essence, regurgitating the ideas and words of others. Now, this is what I want to emphasize here, a last resort. So we only use quotations sparingly in academic writings at the graduate level, because when we're simply using quotes, it can make it hard for the student to demonstrate critical thought and interpretation. And so we only use quotes very sparingly. When you are using quotes, it's critical to use quotation marks. And within your in-text reference, you also need to note the page number uh, that's crediting the ideas from those other sources. And as with paraphrasing and summarizing, we still need to include the reference list. Now, what I want to point out is that if you cite the reference without the quotation marks, and without the page number within the citation, it can acknowledge the use of the content but not the wording. And acknowledging source but not voice is plagiarism here at the University of Waterloo. Okay, so we're going to take a look at some examples of either acceptable or unacceptable paraphrasing. Within the chat box, like last time, you'll find a link, and once you click on that link, you'll find an original text, about a short paragraph long, that's on a topic of school-age substance abuse. You'll also find multiple choice questions of examples that are showing paraphrasing of that paragraph that is either acceptable or unacceptable. And we're going to ask you to point out which of those are acceptable versus unacceptable. Now, if it's unacceptable, I'd also like you to try to identify why. Now, please work on these questions individually, so please don't share responses in the chat box. We'll give you about 5 minutes to get your answers submitted, and then we'll take a look at the most popular responses on what acceptable paraphrasing can look like. Okay, so it's looking like most of you have had a chance now to get your answers in. So let's take a look at what we've got here. Well, I'll start by reading out the original text, which stated that research has long pointed at the dramatic power of peer influence in adolescence and young adulthood, but what has not been adequately considered in previous research and prevention strategy is whether this peer influence comes simply from what other peers have actually believe is the right thing to do and how they behave, or from what young people think their peers believe is right and how they think most others behave. And this is coming from a textbook by Perkins. Okay. So the vast majority of you were correct. This first option here was unacceptable, and specifically because it was missing that in-text citation saying that it was from Perkins 2003. Now, this next one saying, while we know that youth are dramatically influenced by their peers, research has not adequately considered where that influence comes from. The paraphrasing then goes on to say that Perkins 2003 points out that young people might know what their peers believe in terms of the right way to behave, but it is also possible that they are simply making an educated guess. Now, this is not acceptable paraphrasing. In particular, the problem with it is that it's only noting some of the content as coming from the source. In particular, this first sentence was the idea coming from Perkins, but hasn't been included as being acknowledged from that source. And so the correct answer here is only partial citation for the paraphrase. And so what I want to emphasize here is that it's very important when you're writing at the graduate level that all of the ideas coming from another source needs to be referenced in the content that you end up providing. Now this next one says, research has long pointed to the dramatic power of peer influence in adolescence, but what has not been adequately considered in previous research and prevention strategy is where that influence comes from. Now, we saw about half of the submissions saying it was acceptable, but the main problem here is that this is more or less copy and pasted from the first sentence of that original text, but it's missing the quotation marks, and it's also missing the page number from where that paragraph came from. And so this is another example of an unacceptable paraphrasing. Okay, so this last one here is saying that research, according to Perkins 2003, has been woefully negligent in answering questions about peer pressure and its effects on young people. He claims that flawed methodologies have resulted in important questions about what adolescents know not being answered. And the vast majority are correct that this was unacceptable because it's misrepresenting the author's intent, and that claims along the lines of woeful negligence are very serious. And if you're saying that Perkins said that, you better be sure that Perkins has said that. Now, the final example here, saying that Perkins 2003 claimed that while research has shown that young people are heavily influenced by their peers, it is not yet known whether young people understand what their peers actually believe, or whether they're behaving in ways they think would gain their peers' approval. And this was the one example of the five that was an example of acceptable paraphrasing. And so good job for the majority of you that got that one correct. Okay, so obviously plagiarism is something we all want to avoid. Now, there's also plagiarism detection software that could be used in some of your courses here at the University of Waterloo. In particular, there's an example called Turnitin, which if an instructor within a course is going to use Turnitin, they need to identify that on their course outlines. Now, if students are not comfortable with the instructor using Turnitin, then the student has to be provided an alternative. And if you have any additional questions about this, I'd first point you to this link here on this particular piece of software. Now, the other software that could be useful for you during your time at University of Waterloo is called Authenticate, and this is a tool that researchers can use to check the work they have personally authored, to look and search against databases of whether or not there is sufficient overlap within their work to that of others that could lead to issues of plagiarism. And if you have interest in using that software, then there's a contact person here at the university that you can get in touch with. Oh, I see that one person has said they can't hear anything anymore. Do others still hear me?
I can still hear you here, Brian.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I can reach out to that individual, Brian. It looks like maybe it's a one-off case here.
Yeah, okay, I appreciate that. And if it's a persistent problem, then we might be able to rope Lowell in it to get that fixed. Okay, so just carrying on here. So what I also need to mention is that academic offenses they come with penalties, and those penalties are going to vary with the severity and the frequency of the offense. Plagiarism, the standard level 1 penalty for plagiarism within a course is to receive a 0 on the assignment, and then an additional 5% off the course grade. Now, with repeat offenses, these penalties can escalate towards expulsion. Now, the level of penalties are also going to depend upon the amount of text involved, the nature of the text, whether it was just um, whether it was a case where the citation has been provided, but not the quotation marks and so on. Other types of academic misconduct can lead to similar types of penalties, including that for cheating or unauthorized collaboration, or the other academic offense that I should point out here is misrepresentation. So if you lie or alter a medical note to receive accommodations, and that is learned of and proven, then a first offense can lead to expulsion. So the bottom line here is that academic offenses can lead to very serious penalties that no one wants to see happen. Now, if you find yourself in that unfortunate spot where a academic offense charge has been charged against you, there is an informal resolution process that should start within 5 working days of an allegation. And although that informal resolution is going to be meted out between the student and the instructor, it also has to be reported to the associate dean for that associate dean's approval. Now, when the informal resolution falls through, then that formal resolution process is going to get kicked in and adjudicated by the associate dean. Now, all formal decisions can be appealed to the Faculty Committee on Student Appeals, and for details on that, you can refer to Policy 72 as well as Policy 70. Another thing I want to touch on here is had a number of conversations with students about plagiarism cases over the years, and there are often common threads that come up during those conversations about how that came to happen. Some of the reasons that students have mentioned why they plagiarized could include statements along the lines of that author just said it better than I could. Often time pressures or careless note taking, a lack of clarity between what is acceptable and unacceptable paraphrasing, confusion about how to cite sources, can all factor into plagiarism cases. But I do want to emphasize that so many of these cases have involved students that are crammed up against a deadline that are trying to get an assignment in. And when you're tired and when you're under stress, you can make poor decisions. And so that's why it's so important to plan ahead and to manage your time well so that you're not up against those deadlines so that you can help avoid these types of cases. In addition, asking for help from your TAs and instructors and advisors. But the bottom line here is that regardless of those pressures, do not cheat, do not plagiarize, because the consequences of cheating are much more severe than performing poorly within one particular class. And we've already seen the penalties that can be kind of leveled against a student if they've been found to commit academic misconduct, but it also costs time. If you're dealing with one of these cases, that's time that you're not spending on your other courses. It also can cost trust between the student and their supervisor and the faculty members. And quite frankly, when there's plagiarism happening within an institution, it ultimately devalues the degrees of your classmates. So the bottom line here is that academic integrity is a shared responsibility of all members of the University of Waterloo community. And so it's important to be aware of UW's policies and procedures and penalties. Now, at the end of the session, I'd encourage you to check out a optional quiz that is part of this workshop, and we'll have a link posted in the chat box to follow. And when we're distributing the slides and recording from this workshop, there are additional resources at the end of the slide deck that may be useful. Now, in terms of the action items for you today, what I do want to emphasize is that after you've completed this session, you can fill out and submit your graduate academic integrity milestone form, and then within the next 8 weeks, complete the graduate academic integrity module on Learn. And then just finally want to say that please do use the many resources available to you to understand academic integrity and to avoid academic misconduct. So bottom line, you can ask for help. And if you have any questions, then I'm all ears. So here's my contact information. And that more or less does it.